We good? There we
Yep.
go. Live. Okay. Hi, Paul. Hi, Alex. How are you guys?
Doing okay?
Good.
Right. I'm going to try and talk and help, but I just had oral surgery a couple days ago on my mouth. And so when I speak too much, it rubs the inside of my lip raw. So I'm not feeling the greatest.
Well, we'll do our best here today. And I'm going to remember that we need to have a prayer this time. Okay, so does someone want, well, we know Lexi's can for listening. So does someone want to offer the prayer for us?
I can.
Thanks, Jeff.
All right, Heavenly Father, we thank thee for this day. We're thankful for the opportunity we have to meet together to discuss our assignment for the week. We pray that we may have thy Spirit with us and that we may learn valuable and important lessons out of this discussion. We say in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you, guys. Okay, well, I'm going to just begin. There's a lot of questions on this one, so there's no way we're going to get through them all in an hour. And
Agreed.
yeah, with the reading and everything. So first off, let me ask you, what'd you think about the reading this week?
It kept me more engaged than the other ones, I felt like.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because I always find space interesting. But it was really sad though in the beginning. I was like, wait, did they die? Because I don't know. I never heard of the Columbia mission. No,
well,
I never learned about it. What?
You're young, that's why.
The funny thing to me on it is that I was about sophomore or junior in high school when that happened. And I don't think I've heard nearly as much about it as I heard about losing the name right now, but the one that happened when I was 1 year old in '86.
Challenger.
The Challenger, yeah. And so I'm reading that, and I was like, man, I was in high school. How did I miss this thing?
Well, this one kind of hit home because my daughter did a report for it in high school. And so I remember a lot. She talked about the teacher on there, Christina or whatever. But let me start with, it begins with 7 months after the Columbia accident, the Columbia Accident Investigation Board, CAIB, presented their report on the cause of the accident. The board pinpointed the technical cause of the accident. It also identified organization issues with NASA dating back decades. The CAIB also reported how manager might have behaved differently during the mission and stressed the organizational shortcoming at NASA that contributed to the accident. So, first off, give me some of your, we know what the case facts were, but what is the issue? What was some of the issues? Paul?
Well, I've mentioned before that I have my wife read this stuff to me, and she was reading it to me as I was sitting in the room rather than recording it for me. And she would interject her thoughts, and they were the same as my thoughts. Number one, I think, and maybe I'm going to jump ahead to too many answers, but I think one of the biggest issues is it seems like NASA is too bureaucratic. There are too many levels and layers, and one of the things that really, really griped me to no end was that the way that, I don't know if it's Rocha or Roca, wrote a scathing email saying, in his opinion, this is the wrong answer. We need to ask for additional imaging help from an outside source. But he didn't send the email to his superiors. Engineers are told not to send messages much higher than their own rung in the ladder. I'm thinking, this is ridiculous. When we're talking about lives of people at stake, when we're talking about a piece of equipment, a shuttle that is worth, what, $1 billion or more, you don't not send something if you think there is an issue. I forget the exact wording, but it was something like, if you see something wrong, say it, or something like that. There was something in the case that mentioned something like that, and I thought he had something to say, and yet he didn't send it because it was not the right hierarchy. And I'm thinking, that is ridiculous. Oh man, that just really, really griped me. but it seems like it's just too bureaucratic. And I see that at corporations too. There's so many things that are just, they get locked up in bureaucracy, and it's sad.
Yep.
What do you think, Jeff?
Yeah, and I'm a lot on that. That was one point I hit on in my paper, was that there needs to be a proper chain for the engineers to put their grievances forward. I mean, I'm a lot like Paul on that. I think the bureaucracy is even thicker in government agencies like this, but it definitely does exist in all places.
I felt that I agree with what Jeff and Paul said. I also mentioned that it seemed like they were so focused on protocol being done correctly, but no one hardly knew what the protocol was or how to follow it. So I felt that for that organization-wise was terrible. So I thought that was a really big issue because I don't know, like all the different groups that were involved in this for different aspects all had their own opinion and all believed that they were like right, but didn't really know who to take that opinion to, because it talked in there how I think one of the meetings didn't go well, and even said they don't know who to report to. But if I was them, I wouldn't know who to report to either, because how like Paul said that they weren't supposed to report higher than like their level. So it's like, well, then where do you take it? So I found that part frustrating and confusing.
Okay. Yeah, and I agree with all of you. It's like some of them were afraid to even open their mouths.
Yeah.
You know, they knew that there was a problem, but they didn't want to, be the ones that, I don't know, pointed fingers or whatever, and didn't want to be the ones that were like, not tattletales, but you know what I mean, in a way. So, yeah, it's so true. Okay. So why is it important? It says a hint here was understanding all aspects of a complex system failure will help prevent future failures, which is true. So what, like I said before, why was it important? Because we learned from that, right? Weren't they learning as far as space travel was going? You may have a thought on that.
Every mission's a learning experience in space travel.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also one of the things I included in my write-up was we've got such a big risk anyways simply by leaving the atmosphere that we need to put a bunch of safeguards in place that we aren't making that risk even bigger. Because there are certain things that are just going to happen. It's an amazing thing that I believe, if I remember right, this was the first mission in U.S. history that we actually lost somebody in outer space. Like the Challenger blew up before it left the atmosphere.
Right.
And so we had done great to that point, but it's just such a big risk that we're taking anyways that we need to make sure that we're safeguarding as much as we can.
Anyone else? I'm going to point fingers or ask, Paul, do you have anything to say on that?
I don't know if I have a whole lot more to say. I just think that I think back to the Apollo 13 issue and how they really banded together to fix that issue. It seemed like, when I've seen that movie, and of course I know movies take liberties and stuff, but it just seems like everyone was on top of their game and everyone was willing to get in and do what they could to solve the issue and bring everyone home safely. Whereas it seems like now, I think that, again, the bureaucracy has just gotten so much bigger and there's so many more, big shots involved or whatever. And I don't know, it just seems like everything gets lost. Because the first thing that struck out of my mind is the comment that this was the biggest piece of foam to come down and hit the shuttle thing. To me, that would be the first red flag. Say, hey, yes, we've had foam strikes before, but this is the biggest one. This could pose an issue. And my big thing was, okay, let's not worry about getting satellites to try to take a picture of the space shuttle and everything. Let's get these guys out there and look at it in person, because they've got to see exactly what's happened, because you can't really see a whole lot from a picture. But I don't know. I was just, my wife and I were just getting so frustrated reading about this. And it's like, this is stuff we never heard when it was actually going on. But we're like, come on, people, let's get this together.
Right. That's an amazing part of it, too. This is in the days of the International Space Station. They could have gone out, and if they would have discovered the damage wasn't going to allow re-entry, all they would have had to have done is go to that space station, and they could have waited for help to be sent.
Right.
You likened it to the Apollo 13 mission, everyone on top of their games. I'd never thought of this before. What popped into my mind when you said that is the patriotism is what drove that with Apollo 13. There's no way we were going to lose people in space and let the Russians have that propaganda.
Right.
And so they did everything they could to make sure that didn't happen. This was just a sign of laziness.
Good point.
Yeah, it's true.
I feel also that higher management were more focused on what's coming ahead than what was currently happening. Because I mentioned a couple times with, I think it was Linda Ham, is her name, of how she was going to be in charge of the next one, and how if this problem, or if there was a problem with the foam strike, how they didn't really categorize it properly. I don't remember if they said it was in family, or I don't know. That was a little confusing. But how they didn't categorize it properly. And then they mentioned a couple times in there how if this didn't go well, then it would delay the next one. And they didn't want the next one to be delayed because all this other stuff would happen. And so I feel like that was another big reason why they were kind of not taking it seriously, because they're focused too much on what's coming ahead than what was currently happening.
But in so doing, they totally lost sight of the whole picture, and that there wasn't going to be a next mission for that space shuttle if they didn't look into it. So,
Okay, so we're going to go on to the next part, and this part it talks about the recovery window and the time period between a threat and a major accident or prevented accident in which collective action is possible. So the first question was, what was the recovery window in this case? I don't know that there really was. I mean, we started out saying that they didn't really discuss it until 7 months later. Why wasn't it done then? Right then. So, and then it talks about the time between when the problem of the foam struck was discovered after launch to the day the Columbia exploded. My whole question again is, why wasn't something done right when it was discovered? And like Paul, you said, lives could have been saved. I don't know. Does anyone else have?
One thing I could say is a possibility, and I agree, things need to be done timely. We're talking government bureaucracy again, and when you're saying 7 months after is when they investigated it, I don't have a huge problem with that as long as they didn't send another shuttle up in that period of time, because it takes a long time for the investigation to take place. And I was watching the news yesterday, and we're talking 2 years after that email scandal that we heard about, that it just came out that the former president actually had been sending emails to the email address that he claims he didn't know about. So it takes a long time in the government for this stuff to come out.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know. I guess in my mind, you know, for instance, this is just a side thing, but if there's an accident at the Bishop's Central Storehouse, we are on it right then. And we're right then. What caused the accident? What can we do to prevent it next time?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's like the next day and the next day. And so I guess but we're not NASA. We're not dealing with
with the government.
Yeah, with the government, like you said. And so I guess I'm thinking of the little tiny corporation versus
well, and with the Bishop Storehouse, it's probably a procedure that you do every day.
Right.
And so you don't want to do it 40 more times before you decide, hey, let's look at why it went wrong this time.
Right, exactly. And how far before did they know about this phone? Before they launched
every mission.
Yeah. So I don't know. Anyone else?
Well,
I'm getting frustrated on it.
Yeah. Well, this whole thing is kind of frustrating, but yeah, they had a history of the foam strikes, and that was part of the reason why they kind of blew it off, because they said, well, we've had these before and it hasn't been an issue. Well, yeah, that's true, but like I said, this was the biggest piece, and that to me was their biggest tip-off that they had to look into it further right away. But yeah, I just don't know. I think I've said all I have to say about it before I get more frustrated.
I think we are. We're just so frustrated. I think that's hilarious. Alexis, do you have anything to add?
I just kept thinking every time I read it, it's like they're so smart, but they're being stupid.
I like that.
Just because with the whole, like what Paul was talking about, the foam strike, just because it's occurred in the past and it didn't cause a terrible damage before in the past, doesn't mean that there won't be an anomaly of one affecting it. Obviously, in the former foam strikes, it did cause some damage, not to the extent to where the shells blew up, but that doesn't mean it wasn't a case. I just thought it was, I agree, like this, I think this reason why this case study kept me like engaged was because I was so irritated with it. Like you guys were with reading it. I feel like I was just getting more and more like, why would they do this? Why is this happening? Oh, I lost my train of thought.
It's okay.
Sorry.
Right. So let's go to the next part where they're the category of downplaying the threats. So the first question was, what is human cognitive basis and how does it apply in this case? Yeah.
So, sorry, you say the what is human cognitive bias?
Bias. And how does it apply in this case?
And now it's using those big words I don't know again.
I know. I have to say really fast, that was what was hard for me reading this, because I'm not an engineer, and it was funny, his sister McHenry in her video mentioned that. Well, don't get frustrated and I had already read it.
So I'm going to ignore the word cognitive and hope I get it right with biases.
Well, there's a hint that says what it is after the question. It says cognitive bias. It's a systematic errors in judgment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I was actually about to say something about that before the question on a systematic error. I wonder what other things were going unreported at NASA because of the culture they had established that we had talked about with the engineer not being able to report above his own rung. And the reason I say that is there's a lot of people that just wouldn't go for that. If they were in an organization and they were told they couldn't report something like that, they'd leave and they'd go somewhere else. Yeah. So NASA, who is possibly the most important wing of the government, especially for space travel, is not even going to be able to compete to get the top people in there filled because they have this culture, this bias that they have created of we do not have problems here at NASA, so we don't need to report them, to where some of the best and brightest have left.
That's sad.
Yeah.
I'd leave an organization if I wasn't allowed to state my opinions on things if I was supposed to be a top level person.
Yeah.
Well, and the other little hint they have here is they talk about the commitment to a course of action into which have already invested a time and money or other resources. And I'm sure that's one of the big things was, well, we already have all this information. We've already done all this time into it. We've already, put this much money into it. But still, to me, that shouldn't matter if you see a problem. So
didn't they also talk about like how they were doing a lot of budget cuts?
yes,
And that's why they needed like satellite pictures, because there wasn't like a lot of cameras to record the proper damage of the foam strike during takeoff anyways.
okay, and that brings us to the next question, Alexis, because it says, what evidence is presented in this case of some of these biases? And like you said, budget cuts. Did they have the right equipment? You know?
Sure, they could have gotten better.
True. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Any other comments on that? I know I'm trying.
I think it's one of the things that if you don't have the resources for something, don't do it. We didn't send a single Apollo mission or anybody up into space until we knew we had the technology to re-enter the atmosphere. And beyond that, the Wright brothers didn't put together a commercial plane before they knew they could keep it in the air long enough.
Right.
You can only work with what you have the resources for. You can dream as big as the sky, but if you don't have the resources, technology's got to wait.
Correct. Okay, I'm going to jump down to, because all these other questions are really basically on the same level. But this one, when did the problems with Columbia begin? Paul?
Well, maybe it's the obvious, but it was on the takeoff when the foam strike occurred. I think that's where it began, unless I'm missing something.
No.
But yeah, I'd say that's where it happened. And I was also surprised to read that they said that their cameras were not up to date or something. They didn't get enough. They didn't have enough of the pictures of the takeoff to get a good shot of it. I'm thinking, well, wait a second. These are people's lives. This is your space shuttle, and you can't even update the cameras to make sure you can, monitor what's going on. That is pretty sad. It's negligent.
Right.
I think going back to when did the problems with Columbia begin, I kind of see it as a way of it kind of began before the Columbia, to me at least, kind of took off, because they knew about the foam strikes for the other shuttles, but didn't bother to try and improve it and fix it. They just wrote it off as this is a normal occurrence. So I think the Columbia was kind of screwed to begin with.
Jeff, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I agree with Alexis on that. I think the systematic errors is where the problem with the Columbia began.
I think you're right.
And if I could backpedal, and because now that I'm thinking about it more, actually, I think the problems with Columbia began when the bureaucracy started to get so big, when people could not convey their thoughts to people and have someone listen. I just think that's pretty crazy, and that's probably where it began, is when things started getting out of hand. Mm-hmm. I have mentioned before how I worked at Disneyland 25 years ago, and then I went back and worked there again about 2 years ago. And I was astounded at the difference in the atmosphere as far as just general things going on, because in the 25 years I was away, all of the Disney theme parks are now under the same management, whereas before each park managed itself. And I just was astounded at the bureaucracy that was different from the Disneyland I knew before and the one I went back to, where we used to have human resources right on site. We can go speak with them. We used to have all these different things right there at the park. And now we had to call Florida for anything and wait in a phone queue. And it's just totally night and day. It's like, man, they've really ruined this. In their effort to streamline and make things consistent. But the thing is, the parks are different, and they don't take that into consideration. But it's just, I can see how that bureaucracy just kind of have ruined the situation, and that's probably what's happened at NASA. Whereas it might have been more of a free form, open, yes, you can express your thoughts, whatever. And now it's like, well, this is not the right procedure. We got to go through this procedure. And it's like, what?
Right. Oh, that's a good example. Thank you. So tell me about the people in the case that were important contributors to the mission's failure, besides the government.
The engineer probably should have said, to heck with your policy. I'm not going to let this shuttle go down. You can fire me.
Right. Yeah.
Well, there's that one guy who said, if there is like how did he word it? Like, if there is a problem with the space shuttle, there's not a dang thing we can do about it. He said something like that. So they were just, because I never took into consideration what Jeff said of how they could have gone to a satellite station and waited there. Because in the reading, it just made it sound like that. Well, there's nothing we can do. It happened. It happened. If they die, they die. It's kind of, I felt like their mentality about it. But I never even considered the shuttle station. But I feel like that guy who said that was kind of an issue, because he was so adamant about that it was not the foam strike that made that huge, or that, well, no, because I guess it wasn't, or how did he go? It's like it wasn't the foam strike that could possibly make that big of a damage. Like, people were just so against that and wouldn't even take it into consideration. And I can't think of his name, but that dude, I felt like it was a really big problem. If you guys know who I'm talking about. There
was Rocha, and then there was Schomburg. And I think it was Schomburg is the one you're talking about, if I've got the right name.
Because Rocha, I felt like, was trying to actually figure out what was happening.
Yes. Because Rocha and Schomburg had a heated discussion in the hallway.
Yeah,
and Rocha was saying there's still a possibility of damage, and Schomburg was saying, oh, that's the quote you just said. If it's that bad, there's nothing we can do about it. So, but there is something they could have done about it. We've already solved the problem. We're not even scientists.
Right. Not the truth.
Now, one thing that confuses, well, not confuses me, but that I find interesting is, like, if that foam strike did hit and there's no way for it to re-enter the atmosphere, it's not like they can go park the thing in Miami and fix it. How in the world do you fix a problem like that before re-entry?
Yeah.
Right.
So, who's accountable and why?
Huh? Did you say Camel Bull?
Accountable.
Who is accountable?
Accountable.
Accountable.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that right.
I think there's a lot of people accountable.
I think so.
The two that we just mentioned, Schomburg obviously is accountable because he didn't want to look into it further. I think Rocha, even though he was the champion, he was championing for looking into it further and doing something, because he did not send those emails off. I think he's partly to blame, because he did not, have the strength of character to buck the system and email the superiors, even though they're not supposed to. I mean, if he felt that strongly to where that he had a heated discussion in a hallway with someone, I think he should have sent that email off to the superior saying, hey, I really think that there is a possible threat here. I think the people that were, they did the simulation. I forget what the name of it was, but there was a simulation they did. And I'm thinking, okay, yeah, that's a simulation. I know a lot of their things they do are based on simulations, but simulation is not real life. Simulation is not, they didn't know for sure exactly how big the piece of foam was. They didn't really know exactly the trajectory it had, what kind of impact it would have had. I mean, there's no way they can recreate something without really analyzing what was that really happened, or having it to analyze. But I don't know. I guess I'm running around in circles, but it just seems like there were a lot of people involved that were at fault.
I feel like Linda Ham was also kind of an issue with how they requested, or Roach not formally, informally requested those satellite pictures, and then she canceled that request, and so they never did get the extra pictures to look at more closely at it.
Okay.
Which is like just killing the investigation.
And once again, I feel like NASA as a whole is at fault, and they are accountable because it is basically under their umbrella per se. And where were the top people? Why weren't they checking on this or this? You know, granted, they probably gave all their confidence in the engineer and in builders and the person that, you know, designed the foam, but why are they still checking on it? You know, so I kind of felt that NASA as a whole was accountable. You know?
And it's slightly off topic on it. When I think of the word accountable, I think of who bears the brunt of the punishment from what happened. And unfortunately, more than anyone is the 7 families that lost a loved one. I don't know how much, it didn't get into this at all. I don't know how much accountability maybe would have fallen right on those 7 if they got on a shuttle they knew wasn't safe or whatnot. But I mean, those are the people that are going to take the brunt of the punishment, regardless of what any report comes out saying.
Right. Right. Okay. What is the concept of team design? We're going to a different direction now. So as a team, and I think that this is funny that I bring this up, this book we're reading now, I think that's where Catherine is kind of heading, is building a team design. So there's 5 conditions that when presented increase the probability of team effectiveness. And they're saying that there's clear boundaries, compelling directions, structure, system that supports the team in completing their work. So do you believe that these things were in place for the teams that were, you know, helping to get them off into space?
I know that clear boundaries were definitely not in place.
Yes. And there was really a structure.
Yeah, no. A system that supports the team to complete their work. They were all kind of working against each other. So that one wasn't there either.
Right.
A really compelling direction. I don't think any of those are actually there.
Right.
Or as if they should be.
Yeah, where's the 5th one? There's only 4.
Yeah. Good
That's
question.
true.
Well,
CD.
what is the 4th one? There you go. I mean, the 5th one. True.
Maybe they did the 5th.
I don't know how well they had each of those 4 things. I think it's very clear they didn't have clear boundaries. I think a case could be made for the others, but clear boundaries is probably the most important.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Okay, sorry, I'm moving to, because I have to plug in this computer. I'm telling you guys, it's not a computer day for me. Go! I'm back to bed. So much for getting up early. Okay, there we go.
I guess I would need to understand a little bit more about these 5 conditions they're suggesting, because it seems like clear boundaries and structure are at least 2 concepts that, in my mind, right now as I'm thinking about it, might be the things that would counteract an effective team. Because while I understand, you know, each team player has to know what they're supposed to do, what their tasks are, so in other words, their boundaries, and there needs to be some kind of a structure, but it seems like structure itself is what caused the problems with the shuttle because they felt like they couldn't go above their certain rung, and so that was itself detrimental. So
Right.
so I think I would have to further understand what they're talking about here as far as structure goes, because it seems to me you have the most effective teams when there's this synergy between everyone and everyone is working towards their main goal. You know, to me, an ideal team was, again, that team that helped with the Apollo 13 issue. Everyone was just jumping in and contributing what they could. But it seems like in the shuttle disaster, it seems like, you know, they're almost like, you know, well, you know, according to what we see, this is an impossibility. This is not a problem. So I don't think we need to look into it. And someone else who's trying to speak up and say, well, it is an issue. And it seems like they're, you know, well, you're crossing your boundary. You know, this is not, you know, this is what, you know, we're the ones who did the simulation and we think it's not possible. And I just think that those boundaries are what are causing this issue. At least that's the way I see it.
The other thing I came up with was there was no clear communication to agree, you know, to the team. There was no communication about the data. There was no decision choices.
Do you mean to the team on the shuttle?
Yeah, or as a whole, you know. In theory, clear communication existed between management in a good scenario. Employees in NASA prior to the accident, prior to the explosion. Problems could have been taken care of at the beginning. And see, once again, I'm getting frustrated because those steps were not taken. And like Jeff said, here now are, 7 lives that were lost because of no clear communication.
I wonder, it didn't talk about it. At least I don't think it did. Was the 7 members on the shuttle, were they ever informed of the foam strike on their ship?
Yeah, they asked for permission to go out and look at it, but there was never a response given.
Oh, I thought that. Oh, okay.
Ah, I missed that part.
Well, I thought it was Roach who asked if they could go out and look at it, but there was never a response.
I could be wrong on that.
Because I don't remember them actually telling the team. Because I feel like, I don't know, if I was part of the team, I wouldn't wait for permission to go look. I'll just go out if I had the equipment.
Agreed. As I recall, I was looking at this just a little bit ago during discussion. The email that was sent to the astronauts was more like, you know, there was a foam strike, but it's nothing to be concerned about.
Okay, so they were told.
Yeah, and they probably, you know, just figured, oh, it's a small one like before. They probably didn't know it was the biggest one they'd ever seen.
Right.
I mean, it even said that Roach gasped when he saw
exactly
the foam that came off. So, and he's an engineer. I don't know. I always feel like it'd be kind of best to take into consideration the judgment of the people who actually build the shuttle.
Right. Okay, so what is the concept of the psychological safety? Sorry. So it says team employment and design that affects team behavior and performance. Concept of risk-taking, culture, and team unity. Was there any team unity in this story?
Maybe
I don't think so.
Roach's team, they were all working together to try and, well, I guess I kind of see the team unity in each individual kind of group. Because one team was like, no, like they were all united basically that the foam strike isn't an issue. And then Roach's team was like united that that they needed to look more in depth into it. I think that not giving the 7 members on the shuttle more information. Sorry, my lips started to hurt. More information about what was happening was a huge failure on their part since they're up in space. I think they should have had more of a say or at least a chunk of the say of what happens, since it's their lives at stake, no one else's.
Okay. Anything else, anyone? So, how about any personal experiences? Okay, I have one I'll just share really fast. As you know, where I work, we have what's called hurricane season. And last year we had two major hurricanes, Hurricane Harvey in Houston, and then another hurricane that hit right after. Well, we're the central storehouse, and then there are 5 other central storehouses. There's one in Tucker, Georgia. There's one in Minneapolis. There's one in Hermiston, and there's one in California. So then we're the central one, and then we distribute to them, and then from there they distribute to the other storehouses in the world, around the world. Well, there was a lot of finger pointing during one of the hurricanes last year in September, because the one storehouse in Tucker, Georgia was not prepared for this hurricane. And they tried to say, well, we didn't send them the stuff we needed and blah, 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 blah. And then we had a gentleman that felt that he had more power over some people, and he was pushing his way and calling up town. Same thing. I want you to know it happens in the church also, okay? It's just part of being a corporation somewhat. But finally, they just got in a conference room. All the key players that needed to be got on a conference call, and within 5 hours, we had trucks of commercial carriers on their way to go help this storehouse so they could help Houston, Texas, and all these other areas. And it was, to me, once again, clear communication. You don't need to start pointing fingers or whatever. Let's just get together as a team. Let's get organized. Let's see what has to get done, what needs to be done, so we can help those people in need. Those that are in need of generators and, tents, per se, and water. I mean, we sent water and water and water. And so to me, that's kind of just a personal experience. Yes, there was a disaster that happened. Let's not start saying, well, it's your fault. You didn't get prepared beforehand. Let's just sit down and get this. And it's like I said earlier, why wasn't this taken care of right after, and sat down and find out what had to be done to help after the disaster? Anyone else have an experience like that? What about you, Jeff?
No, I very well agree with that. I think you covered it good.
Paul?
The only real world experience that's similar to this is when I described about going back to Disneyland and seeing the bureaucracy that had taken place, and how sad I was. And in fact, I can't remember what the situation was, but I went to one of the managers and I said something about, how this and this was going on, and it's not like when I worked here before. And he's like, well, if you're expecting to see the same design you had seen before, you're going to be disappointed. Ooh. And I was like, whoa, that was pretty harsh. But well, truthful, I guess. But, I thought that was just kind of interesting that he just flat out, called it the way it was. So, yeah.
What about you, Alexis?
I have no personal experience that I can think of that relates to this.
So, we were supposed to look at a YouTube. It said research the case and share the group how things turned out. And they suggested a YouTube.
I watched that, and it was the same one.
Oh, okay.
that we had that was already up, or that she posted at the beginning.
Oh, okay.
And it didn't tell us how it turned out. It just told us that they went down. And I was like, well, how did it end? Like, was it the foam strike? Like, no one actually ever said what the issue was. Even in the beginning for the synopsis, it said they investigated 7 months later, but still never told us what they concluded the issue was.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
I don't know.
You know what? I agree with you there. I couldn't really find out anything about it either, and they didn't really give it to us in our notes. So, so just in conclusion, what do you think NASA needs to do now? Or done right after?
Oh, I was going to say they need to go to Mars now, but
yeah.
Yeah.
That's fun.
So, what do you guys think we should after?
I guess the whole department needs a restructuring. They need to reevaluate what their priorities are and how they can communicate better. And I don't know, feel like we need to get reinvigorated and re-energized as to what our purpose is and what we're trying to do, and have everyone have that same goal and have that determination to work together, whatever the cost, to reach that goal. It's interesting how reading this scenario, I went out on Wikipedia and was looking up all sorts of NASA stuff, and because I was thinking, how did we get to this point? But just reading about how they ended the space shuttle thing, because I thought why would they end this? This is overall it's a pretty good thing. Although I was telling my wife, out of 4 initial space shuttles, they lost 2. That's not very good odds. So, I know they had, over 100 missions that they did, but still to lose 2 of the fleet is pretty sad. But
it was the ones that started with a C.
Right.
Challenger. Yeah.
Yeah.
They ended that to do this other mission, this other set of things, but then that got canceled because it was not using the latest technology and it was way over budget. So then they decided to go a different direction. So I don't know if there has been any restructuring within NASA or not, but it just seems like they were, doing the same old thing. And I don't know. It's hard to say, but I think that's what they need to do. They need to total revamp from top to bottom and reevaluate what their real mission is and get everyone behind that mission and working together for it.
Anyone else have anything?
I feel like that was well said.
Jeff, do you have any?
Yeah, I think we just covered it throughout the whole thing, and there's lots of things that need to be done. And if they're going to move forward, they need to restructure how they operate the system and the lines of communication.
Sure. Okay, well, I think we have covered everything, guys. Just a little side note, I won't be here next week. I'll be at girls' camp. So I think you have it, Jeff, right?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. So since you had to start this for me, do you want me to do another time for someone, or?
No, this works. I'll just post this in the discussion board and email it to everyone. And
then I'll put a little something in the discussion part about a summary, since I won't be there on Saturday, that you guys can just read or whatever.
Okay.
Okay. And then I think after that, Alexis has it.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. You guys have a great weekend and a great Father's Day. Happy Father's Day, you two. So hopefully you'll be spoiled. So, okay. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Oh,